What's up, friends? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. This is a very important video that I really hope that you watch because I had a very important conversation with someone that I think will really help you better understand what's happening in the Middle East between Israel, America, and Iran. Before I do that, though, I have a quick favor to ask. A lot of you seem to have responded well to the last video I did responding to Ali Stuckey and her take on biblical immigration, term used very loosely. And I want to know if you like that kind of format and if you want to see more response videos like that. So leave a comment below. I read all the comments. They definitely shape the kind of content that we make on this channel. And if you have some suggestions on videos that you want to see me respond to, you can email me, info@thenewEvangelicals.com. I would absolutely love to know what you have to say. Okay, this conversation, I brought on Nazanin Nour. She's an actress. She's a human rights activist. She's deeply tied to Persian media, and she is Iranian. And I brought her on to talk about what is going on right now between America, Israel, and Iran, and also what is it like for the average citizen of Iran to live right now. Like, what's the government like? And honestly, she blew my mind because, shocker alert, a lot of how we understand the Middle East, especially countries like Iran, come from a very Western media perspective. I didn't realize that there's a huge problem, a huge tension right now between the civilians of Iran and the government of Iran, which is really oppressive to the people, especially towards women in particular. So I brought her on to talk about all of that and to get her perspective so we can better be educated around the Middle East, what's going on, in hopes that it helps you find a better path forward in faith, politics, and culture. I would also love your feedback on these types of conversations, and if you want to see more of these as well on this channel. All right, enjoy it. Talk to you soon. Oh, okay. Nazanin Nour, I appreciate you making time, really last minute to come on the show and share your perspective with what's going on right now geopolitically and just sharing more about the maybe complicated nature of the country of Iran and what's going on between the citizens and the government. We were saying even off the air, I don't think a lot of people, and I put myself in this category as being ignorant to even being aware of how much of a separation there is right now between the people of Iran and the actual regime of Iran. So I really appreciate making time. Give the audience an introduction. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, for platforming this situation. I really appreciate that, and I know Iranians appreciate it as well. My name is Nazanin. I'm an actor, producer, writer, and I'm also a human rights advocate. And one of the main things that I focus on is advocacy against the Islamic Republic and Iran. And just like you said in the beginning, I know that a lot of people, I was born and raised in this country, in America, from Arlington, Virginia. I'm an East Coaster. So I feel like I grew up with the political world around me because that's home base for all of these types of things. And it's what I studied at Georgia Mason University as international politics. It's something I was always really passionate about and interested in. And also, I have a good friend, Tara Grammy, who's an actress, and she always says to be Iranian is to be political. So, there's people that say like, oh, I don't want to get political, but our entire existence is kind of born of the situation in our homeland. And just to start off, like you said, the Islamic Republic is a ruling theocracy that came into power in 1979 through the Islamic Revolution that was led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Okay. And before that, we had a monarchy. And the last dynasty in that monarchy were the Pahlavis. So if you hear the Shah referenced before 79, they're referring to the Pahlavi family. And so once that happened, we had the hostage crisis where Islamic Republic supporters took over the American embassy in Tehran, and they were held for, I believe, 444 days, and they were released as soon as Jimmy Carter, abdicated his presidency, as soon as the inauguration happened with Ronald Reagan. And then we had the Iran-Iraq war that started right around that same time as well. So there's a lot of tension, conflict, war, upheaval in Iran. And what happened then too is, and we can get into specifics if you have questions, but the country turned from a monarchy into a theocracy. So then it was, now it was ruled by Islamic fundamentalists. They changed everything. Women lost a lot of rights. women had to start covering, mandatory. So the hijab and covering that you see many women wear, that's not by choice in Iran. It's mandatory. And as I told you before we started, that was at the root of the last major uprising in Iran in 2022, known as the Women Life Freedom Movement. There was a young girl named Mahsa Amini. She was reportedly beaten by the morality police, which are these, they roam the streets and they're looking for people who aren't covered properly, who are doing something that's, against the Islamic code for the country. And girls, boys too, but in this situation for hijab, girls have been beaten, arrested, imprisoned, sexually assaulted, murdered, like in the case of Mahsa Amini. And that sparked this major uprising, which was covered by a lot of media. And it was thanks to, this Gen Z-led revolution inside of Iran, mass protest in, I think it was all provinces, which had never happened before in Iran. And the thing that happens in Iran every few years, and it's actually the time in between these uprisings has shortened because it shows how fed up the people are with this regime. And it's really important to note it's the Islamic Republic versus Iran, because many Iranians, millions of Iranians inside and outside, and including us in the diaspora, don't feel like that regime doesn't represent us. It doesn't represent our history, our culture. We have thousands of years of history prior to their 46-year murderous rule. And unfortunately, a lot of people only know Iran under the Islamic Republic and assume everybody from there is like that, or that the way that life is there under this theocracy where women are not considered equal to men, where there's just repression of artists, of regular everyday people, government corruption, which I understand every country has government corruption, but it's to another level in that country. Their funding of terror proxies, etc. And so it's really important to note that the people are not the government. And one of the latest polls I remember that came out right around the 2022 uprising showed that regime has less than 20% support inside of Iran. So Iran has a population of almost 91 million people. So that means like 70 some odd million Iranians do not want to be governed under that regime. And so these clashes and protests and uprisings continue to happen. There's always these inciting incidents, and it always grows into larger movements, because at the base of all of this is that people want the regime gone. So there's always this like powder keg moment, whether it's a water shortage in a certain province or a girl getting beaten for her hijab and it was seen in the streets and it kind of caused people to gather and coalesce. It starts as something it's one reason, but it grows into, we want the regime gone. And the biggest chants that we always hear are death to the regime, death to the dictator. And so, the people are just under this constant pressure of repression, of subjugation, of, not being able to freely enjoy their lives, to pursue the things that they want to pursue. And there's a really big gap between the elite and those that are wealthy and might benefit from the regime and the middle and lower class of Iran.
Wow. Okay, this is really helpful. Let me also preface, and I tell a lot of my guests this, whenever I say something that's ignorant or wrong, just correct me. Full permission granted on the show. But I'm trying to just give my audience and myself some kind of like comparable like comparison to like what you're talking about. And what it sounds like, a lot of what we do is we track Christian nationalism, because I grew up an evangelical fundamentalist, and I grew up in the world that really believes that they have a God-given right to take over America and make it almost theocratic in nature. And that doesn't mean though that a lot of Christians believe that. Like myself, I'm a Christian, I stand against that. I know that of course the majority of Iran is Muslim, but they're rejecting the government. Is that correct? So there's a level of extremism in the government versus just like the average person who might, also be Muslim. Is that correct? Because that's how I think about it. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense what you're saying. There's a difference between fundamentalists and those who just practice a religion.
Exactly.
But also in Iran, what's important to note is that because religion has been imposed on the people, there are a large percentage of Iranians that are just sick of religion, sick of Islam because of the way it's been used to subjugate them, don't consider themselves religious, don't consider that maybe they consider themselves agnostic, for example. So there's definitely people that practice, of course, there are definitely people that practice just, your regular everyday peaceful Muslim, just like there are Christians and Jews that, Baha'is and so forth. But the country is ruled by these fundamentalists. And again, when you have people, as I'm sure you're aware, ruling over you with this religious book, and they're distorting it to their benefit to subjugate you and repress you, you're going to get disgusted by that book and what's in it. And that's how the majority of Iranians feel. And so I think there was this thing that started too, where, a lot of people in the West, because they don't understand it, they see Iranians themselves, even when they speak out against these fundamentalist ideas and repressive laws, they're met with, oh, but you're being Islamophobic. And it's like, no, the people in Iran that have lived under this, they're allowed to come out and tell their stories and say, this is how religion, am I allowed to cuss?
You are.
This is how religion has fucked our lives. So we don't want to live under that. And there's so many people in Iran, especially during this last protest movement, that made it very clear. These are really beautiful images that would come out of girls who were protesting against this mandatory hijab law, because hijab is mandatory in Iran under the Islamic Republic. They were, no headscarves and t-shirts, maybe crop tops and jeans, standing with their friends who are wearing maybe a headscarf or maybe the chador, which is like the long black garment that you might see some women wear. The faces are not covered. That's something different. It's just the black. So they were standing together, holding hands, raising their fists, raising a peace sign, because they were showing we want to live with our compatriots. It doesn't matter what you practice, whether you're atheist, agnostic, Baha'i, Jewish, Muslim, Christian. We have it all. Zoroastrian, which is, the very original thing that people in Persia were. And we're allowed to live side by side. They want that. But this government is not allowing that. One of the major reasons they need to go. One of many reasons they need to go.
No, that's really helpful. As I'm sure you can imagine, with my upbringing, I listened to talk radio most of my life. So when 9/11 happened, it was every Muslim is a radical, and it
Right.
takes a lot of work to undo that when you're just taught that your whole life. And so we do our best to be as as pro the rights of our Muslim neighbors as possible, while also being able to recognize that, like in any religion, you can find extremism and fundamentalism, right? That's just a problem of humanity, and you can find it anywhere. It doesn't matter who you are. And that is helpful for us to understand. Is another reason why so many people are so against the regime, is part of it because of all of the sanctions that are on the country due to some of the regime's actions as well? I mean, again, I don't know much about, I don't have a deep knowledge of this. I just hear things like, oh, the U.S. has put sanctions on Iran because of this thing. Does that play a role into how the citizens view their government?
The people view the government as the problem. They view whatever pressures that they're under as a direct result of the actions of this regime.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and I'm not speaking, I'm trying to amplify the voices that I hear from inside of Iran and what I've seen over the years, because I work in Persian language media as well. So I have a lot of access to people inside, whether they're political prisoners, family members of prisoners, regular everyday people, etc. But many people see this problem as not, and we can get into this too, because it's very complex and nuanced, even within the Iranian population and diaspora, but they see everything that happens to them, including this latest war with Israel, as this is the fault of our regime for not caring about our lives enough to try to seek peace with the West or not fund terror proxies that are also causing havoc in the region, not just in Israel and other countries as well. And they see them as the ones that are responsible for this. So, of course, there's people that, like I said, it's complex and nuanced. U.S. and Israel, they are aggressors and they do bad things. Islamic Republic is also an aggressor and does bad things. And I think if we want to be fair, we have to call the actions of all of them out. But in this specific case, the overwhelming majority of Iranians that I see, that I speak to, that I've been reading constantly on Twitter for the last however many years, they view the regime as the problem. Like, they are the problem. They are the reason we have these problems. They are the reason we can't live freely and, have what other people in other countries have as well.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. I would love to kind of your take, on the most recent events, right? Because from my vantage point, again, just being ignorant on this topic, one day I woke up and saw Israel launching missiles into Tehran. And I'm like, okay, what is going on here? And then all of a sudden, our regime commander-in-chief says, oh, we'll give 2 weeks, psych, we're going to bomb Iran. And I'm like, wait, what is happening? What did Iran do to deserve this? What am I missing anything here? Like, how do you read what just happened over the past few weeks?
I think that, how can I start answering this? There's a lot of things at play. I think, well, for the last 46 years, Iran, the US, and Israel have never been on good terms, right? So, and I think Israel and Iran, well, I'm going to say Israel and the Islamic Republic, have been having this like tit for tat thing, and there's proxies that are always involved. And this person maybe takes out, Israel has assassinated nuclear scientists, and the US assassinated a general, and, then Iran, the Islamic Republic will use proxies to, fight back as well, or their own Revolutionary Guards. But I think this most recent thing it was ramping up. There were nuclear talks that were happening between the US and the Islamic Republic. I believe that a lot of people weren't happy about that. And I do think that Israel wanted to get rid of a certain threat that they think was posed onto their country and their people. And so they say they preemptively acted, and that's why this happened. And now we're in the situation we're in, which I also really kind of never thought we would be in, to be honest with you, because I think, especially growing up here and watching how politics has played out, I always see these countries going back and forth with each other, and I always think they need each other as the boogeyman. So it's like, they're not going to try to get rid of each other, because they need each other to be the enemy, the people that we're fighting against, the people that we need you to supply weapons and funding for. So like, we can't get rid of each other, Right. But now things have ramped up. I'm trying to remember the second part of your question was, just my thoughts in general on what happened.
Yeah.
It's complex. Here's the thing. There's many Iranians inside of Iran that are so fed up that they don't want their country to be bombed. They don't want to be under the uncertainty of war, because there have been civilian casualties. But they also don't want to live under this regime. So it's kind of like, we want the change, but we don't want foreign intervention or military intervention from another country to be doing it, because that could lead to a whole host of problems as well, or it could lead to a power vacuum. It could lead to maybe something, even though it doesn't seem like it can get worse than this regime, maybe it'd be something worse than this regime, or instability. Or what if, there's been talks that came out of Israel by certain people in the Knesset about separating Iran, partitioning Iran, which is like a really big deal for Iranians too, which is keeping our territorial integrity, no matter who you talk to. Nobody wants Iran broken up. That's Iranian. And so there's just all this complexity where, again, a lot of people were saying no to war, but also no to the Islamic Republic. And then there were people that were like, well, maybe this is the only way we can get rid of this regime, so I guess we'll just see what happens, and we're not going to say anything against it, but we're not for it, but we're also not against it, if that makes sense. It's extremely complex, and you'll find a whole host. I personally was in the camp of course, I never want war. I'm not an advocate of war. I definitely don't want my homeland bombed. I have family there, I have friends there, and even if I didn't have family and friends there, that's my homeland. To me, like, those are all my compatriots. So I don't want them to live under the fear of that. They also lived under an 8-year war with Iraq that caused severe PTSD to people. I have an uncle that was killed. Everybody has family members that were affected by that war. So now that same generation has had their PTSD re-triggered. And then there's people that say, well, revolutions and regime changes are bloody, and people have to be sacrificed and killed for it to happen too. And then there's other people that say, but we don't want to sacrifice people and be killed. And then other people say, but how else are we going to do it? Because we've tried, we've had uprisings, we've been in the street. And when they go out into the street and protest, they get shot, they get killed and murdered by state violence and bullets. They get imprisoned, they get executed, they get tortured because they just were, protesting for freedom. We have artists, rappers, singers, actors who are not allowed to work, who are not allowed to leave the country, who have been imprisoned and tortured, and some have had to flee because of their music, because of their art, because it's, seen as anti-regime propaganda. And so, I mean, you can understand how some people living there think, well, maybe this is the only way. And then there's a lot of people that are like, but we also don't want bombs to drop on our country either,
It's
And Iran is a
yeah.
really beautiful, large country. Like I said, we have thousands of years of history, gorgeous historical sites. I mean, it has everything other cities have. I also think a lot of people don't know what Iran is like. You have Tehran, the capital, which is like a New York City. You can go up north and ski. There's people that come from all over the world. We have some of the best skiing in Iran. You can go to the Caspian Sea. You can go to there's water near the Persian Gulf and all of these things. Like Iran has everything. And I think a lot of people don't know that either. It's a really big country made up of also a lot of provinces, ethnicities, different languages, the main language being Persian. I hope that answered your question, but there's a variety of reactions to what has happened.
No, you definitely did. Look, one of the benefits of podcasting is that we can get nuanced, and we have to, right? We too often live in a binary world of we're good, they're all bad, and it doesn't
Right.
it doesn't help anything, right? And things are complicated. Like the way we get to these situations is through a lot of history and decisions and all kinds of stuff. So I think that that's
Yeah.
really helpful for the audience to recognize that like this is complicated, and I can totally empathize with the Iranian people because what a catch-22, right? Like what way to be stuck between a rock and a hard place of we're under this horrific regime that is killing us, that is persecuting us, that is minimizing our freedoms, especially if you're female, and also we don't want bombs randomly dropping on the heads of our people. Like also a very valid thing to say.
Totally. And the thing is with that Israel did take out a lot of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard commanders, IRGC, and regime officials. And so, the sentiment amongst the majority of Iranians outside and inside was like, no one's shedding tears for these guys because they have a direct hand in the oppression of the people. They're the ones that give the commands for shooting protesters in the streets and for assaulting the girls and women. You know what I'm saying? And so nobody looks at that and says, oh, that's too bad. They're just like, all right, well, they're gone.
Right.
But all the civilians that got killed in the crossfires too, it's like you said, it's a really big catch-22, and it's caused a lot of complex feelings for everybody to come up about how everybody feels about the situation.
I'm not sure if you saw, but an article came out by Reza Pahlavi, Iran crown prince, in the USA Today article, and he says Israel weakened the Iran regime, and the world must help finish the job. And his whole piece is essentially saying that the international community must support the people of Iran more than ever, while also imposing maximum pressure on the regime. I know that I didn't give you this ahead of time. I just saw it right before we started recording, so I wanted to ask you about it. What are your thoughts on that? I as you could imagine, I've never heard of Reza Pahlavi before, but it sounds like he's someone who's in exile underneath this current regime and is advocating for nonviolent resistance to what's going on there.
Well, so Reza Pahlavi is the former crown prince of Iran. So his dad was the Shah that I was talking about pre-1979.
Got it.
So
Thank you.
I believe, yes, of course. I believe he was like 14, 15. He was somewhere in his teens, I believe, when they had to leave Iran. And he has been calling for this maximum pressure on the regime for a while now. And I do agree that, of course, there needs to be pressure on the regime. I think that's something that everybody who advocates against this regime talks about, as far as like the international community, in my opinion, had a really big opportunity in 2022 to support the people more, whether it was just being vocal about it under, the president, which helps embolden the people. Because if the people think that they're backed by, the greatest superpower in the world, you never know what it could lead to. Because one thing that happened too was in 2009, during what was called the Green Movement uprising, which I happened to be in Iran for that. I just happened to be there for the elections. Yeah, it was a coincidence.
Wow.
My sister and I were saying, yeah, so we saw everything firsthand. One of the chants, I was trying to remember how they said it in Persian, but it was like, Obama, Obama, Yabama, Yauna, which was Obama, Obama, you're either with us or you're with them. Because they were counting on President Obama to maybe say something, to vocalize his support for the people, to maybe, say, hey, Islamic Republic, maybe you guys need to, these elections that you have, it doesn't seem like they were actually free and fair. It seems like they were rigged. Maybe we should have a referendum. Maybe we should have an internationally monitored election and see who the people actually want power. But he didn't. And I do recall that I think it was after this latest uprising in 2022. I believe he was on that podcast. What's that really famous one? Pod Save America.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I think it was on that podcast. He said something along the lines of, one of my biggest regrets of my term was not supporting the people of Iran more during that time. And so I think in hindsight, it's easy to see, because right now, when people are calling for Iranians to go out into the streets, it's very confusing. Israel was doing it too, because they've made up this whole IDF page and Mossad page and Israel page in Persian. So they're directly communicating with the people of Iran. But the internet got shut off by the regime. And Israel is actively doing strikes and dropping bombs. But then there's also people being like, and this is the time to take out into the street. And it was very confusing for people. It's like, this is actually not the best time, because we don't have weapons. We don't know when the bombs are coming.
Right.
It's not, but when they were already out en masse in 2009, in 2017, in 2021, in 2022, these would have been prime times for the international community to support the people and publicly support the people. And again, maybe call for internationally monitored elections to get this regime out. But nobody did that. And now we're here.
Are you... Look, I'm going to be... People who listen to the show know this. We are not big fans of Trump for a lot of reasons, and the people who got him elected. But... Okay, I figured. But it does seem like, I don't know. Given what you're telling me about this regime in particular, and it seems like he's been pretty blatantly direct towards them, saying some of the quiet parts out loud of like, hey, these guys are problematic, which sounds like it's a good thing he's saying that. How do you interpret, Trump's most recent actions, not just even the bombing, but even just the threats of like, hey, if you retaliate, we're really going to, we're going to go all in here. Do you see Trump, as someone who might be able to, do what the people want to break up the regime and maybe give liberation to the people? Do you think Trump even cares about the Iranian people? I don't know. I'm trying to read the room as positively as possible, but I'm not a huge Trump fan, but I also want to be fair, so.
Listen, my gut has always been that Donald Trump will do what benefits Donald Trump and his friends and his cronies and this country. And that I understand. Every leader will do what's best for their country, what's in the best interest for their country. Donald Trump has also said over the last year, I'm not interested in regime change in Iran. He said it as recently as last week. But he also has a lot of mixed messaging. And I personally feel he's just kind of seeing where the wind blows. When Israel was, hitting a lot of places, a lot of military targets, they took over the airspace. I feel like that's when he was like, yes, and now we're on this is the right thing to do. And then when maybe he saw sentiment change or the number of civilians killed, he was like, oh no, we have to have peace. So I actually don't think he has a concrete plan, and he's just kind of going off of vibes, is how I feel. But I do think that he thinks it's in the best interest of the US for there not to be a regime change in Iran. I think that. But I do think he changes his mind on a whim, and I don't know exactly what the people around him are telling him either. I think there's a lot of mixed messaging. I think Israel definitely wants the Islamic Republic gone, but I also do think sometimes they don't, in the sense of that whole thing I said, you need to have a boogeyman. It's kind of like what Bill Clinton said recently about how Netanyahu is going to start this war because he wants to avoid having to be prosecuted for what they're trying to try him for in Israel and to keep his power, a la maybe Iraq and Bush. So
right.
I don't think anyone has the best interest of the Iranian people at heart. I'll say that, except for Iranians themselves.
Yeah, it seems that way. Can you touch on, you mentioned the importance of really highlighting the gender inequality under the current regime in Iran, and you did give some examples of that. Can you give any for the average, female in Iran who's just trying to make it, what is life like for them based on what you've heard from people on the inside?
Yeah, you see the repression firsthand if you visit as an Iranian. When I was there, I was stopped by the morality police more than one time, and I saw things that you hear about too happening. The secrecy, just the way that you can't act in public, for example, the things that you can't do. But beyond that, beyond the fact that the dress code is mandatory. So girls cannot show their hair, they cannot wear certain things. You have to have some sort of cover up, right? And the images you might be seeing in these news reports in the last couple of years with girls without the headscarf or wearing a crop top, they're flouting these. This is a direct form of civil disobedience that they're doing. They're actually doing it with risk to their own lives. It's not because the laws have changed under the Islamic Republic. It's not because the regime is like, all right, do what you want. It's because they're committing a brave act of civil disobedience. They're using facial recognition technology to send tickets to girls. I believe that it was purchased by China. So, they'll get your face, and then if you're not wearing a thing, they'll send you a ticket in the mail, or they'll impound your car, which has happened to people we know. So it's very real. Wow. Women, as a girl or woman, you need the permission of your father to leave the country, or if you're married, you need the permission of your husband to leave the country. They don't have equal rights in divorce or custody. There's still certain times where if violence is committed against women, even if it's done, especially if it's done within a family, the law sides with the male, if that makes sense. For example, maybe an honor killing. If somebody, disrespected our family pride or name, and there's violence committed against the girl, it's not that hard to get off that crime or have a lighter sentence, or, not even be charged or prosecuted. Women can't sing solo in public. There's been times where there's concerts that have been canceled because a girl is going to sing with other people, which is supposed to be allowed technically, I guess, but it's not. And girls that have sang and again, acts of civil disobedience have sang on the streets, just like you see people do here in America, make little TikTok videos of themselves singing like classic songs. They've been arrested. Their social media pages have been wiped. These are the types of things that happen. So, and there's more, but that's just like a brief glimpse into it. And, I see some people make this false equivalency here in America. And I most recently saw it on The View, and I saw a clip of it. I couldn't watch the whole thing because I got so angry. I just read the transcript of it. But comparing we have it bad here too, or our laws are under attack here too. Yeah, our abortion laws here are under attack. Our bodily autonomy is under attack. But I still can walk out of my apartment in Los Angeles looking like this, and I won't risk arrest, imprisonment, or death. I can leave the country, I can go on a vacation, and I don't got to tell anyone or get permission from anyone. I can get married and divorce, and I won't be treated as less than half of a man because of my gender. There's just so many things that there's this false equivalency that I see made here that I think people need to stop doing, because it's like it diminishes and reduces what the women and girls of Iran actually go through. And I think, the way to get Westerners to understand things is to tell them, hey, you know how your bodily autonomy is under attack here? In Iran, it's even worse. Let me tell you how. But to try to say they're equivalent and be like, well, we don't really need to worry about their problems because we have it bad here too, it's not the same,
No, clearly. Yeah, no, definitely not. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, while we're on that topic, just briefly, and then we'll continue on. I am curious. I mean, I'm sure you have seen the people who are in political power these days. I'm sure you're aware of the term Christian nationalism. When you see some of the rhetoric coming from your Charlie Kirks of the world, your Matt Walshes of the world, certainly there's got to be times where you're like, there are parts of the world that have taken this to its logical conclusion, and it ends up not being good for anyone. I mean, it's got to be concerning for you to hear that kind of rhetoric, even if it's much lighter, admittedly, for sure, but just that path that some of those folks are walking on. I mean, I for example, I've been following the recent the nomination, right, of Zoran Mamdani. Right?
Mamdani, yeah.
Yes, great. I'm all in. I'm like, I love this guy. He's awesome. But as a former evangelical Christian, I go right over to Charlie Kirk's Twitter because I know what he's going to say, and it's Islamophobic. This is why we don't want to import the quote unquote third world. And I'm like, this kind of fundamentalism does lead somewhere. It can lead to really poor outcomes for the majority of our neighbors. So I'm sure for you, when you see that kind of stuff too, you're like, oh my gosh, like what are we doing, as a country if we're on that path and those people have so much access to power?
Yeah, I mean, the things that I see from within this country by elected officials is, I mean, there's that one guy, I can't remember what state he's from, Randy Fine. He tweets the most racist garbage.
What's his
If
name?
you want to look it up, Randy Fine. I believe he's a congressman. Just the most.
He looks problematic.
Yeah, he just.
Florida looks like Florida.
Florida. Well, yeah, Florida, man.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, of course, when I see that type of rhetoric here, I usually call it out as well. When I, or even when they were giving orders to silence protesters that were protesting in support of Palestine, the way that they were treating those students and protesters, I was like, this is what they do in the Islamic Republic to student protesters. They beat, shoot, kill. They didn't kill anyone here, thank God. But how do we know that won't escalate? So yeah, of course, there's things to keep an eye on. And I think we should all be aware of them and fight back against them here in our own country, 100%. But like you said, with Zoran Mamdani, I mean, the racism was immediate, the backlash. And the fear that I find it objectively hilarious that there are people that actually think this guy wants to turn New York City into a caliphate, or, like everyone's going to have to, like, there's so many funny TikToks right now of like, welcome to my day in my new Muslim New York, where we all forced to pray to Allah. And it's so, it reminds me of, we talk about this actually, and because I'm an actor, we talk about how this affects Hollywood and how Hollywood has made some strides in the last 10 years on being way better at representation and calling out and not using any more stereotypical racist derogatory language toward the Black community, the Asian community, the Latino community, etc. But I think everybody still thinks it's a-okay to punch down on anyone from the Middle Eastern region, Iranian, Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, Iraqi, whatever. We're still kind of fair game for a lot of people, and nobody, because imagine all of these people and the way they're talking about Zoran Mamdani, imagine that candidate was Black or Asian and this rhetoric was being used. I think a lot of people would be up in arms. And I think a lot of people are up in arms right now defending Zoran Mamdani, which I love to see. But the fact that a lot of this rhetoric is also being pushed by politicians that are supposed to be representing us for a better future for America, it's so shameful, and it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because you're going to have people that are not as informed thinking, yeah, this guy's a terrorist and he's going to ruin New York City. And what are they going to do now to people who look like Zoran or have a name like him? It's like there's always this cycle in America. I grew up in a time where people really didn't know much about where I was from. And you get a lot of racism and stereotypes, and then it gets a little bit better, and then something happens in the region, and then it comes back to being bad for you again, and then something else. And there's always like these 2 steps forward, 8 steps back type thing. So anyway, all in all, I think it's still okay to punch down on brown people is how it feels.
I have to agree. First off, I want to say that it is ironic watching so many of the politicians who are making these ridiculous claims about Mamdani, being a radical jihadist, whatever. It's coming to America. They're the same people who downplayed the insurrection with Christian flags and Bibles. I mean, they brought a cross, for God's sake, and tried to hang our vice president. Right? That's not no terrorist there, according to those people, but a democratic socialist who wants to bring affordable health care to New York City and make rent cheaper. Wow, what a radical it is. So it is not lost on me personally to see that. And by the way, that's just par for the course, right? Because Christian nationalism is incredibly Islamophobic. In a weird way, it's almost like another holy war in 2025. They really see themselves as fighting good versus evil, a war of religions, and we're kind of caught in the mix of it, right? No, I do agree with you. I was thinking about just like the movies I've seen in Hollywood regarding like war in the Middle East, and just like like how it's always so stereotypical, right, of like the terrorists or like, the radical Islamists and how the good guys got to destroy them. And it's true, like for some reason in our American psyche, those things are just kind of acceptable and like totally cool and okay. But yes, you're right. If it was a black person and it was full of racial slurs or stereotypes, it would be unacceptable. So I think that's a really valid point that we have to keep in mind as we keep navigating this, because look, I tell people often, like, a part of us as Christians trying to renegotiate faith and find a better path forward has to include decolonization, right? I mean, listen, I'm a white man in America. No matter what, I've been colonized, right? Like my mindset it comes from that perspective of just colonization and supremacy, and that's not like a light switch. You don't just turn it off one day and all of a sudden you're healed. You have to constantly reevaluate your own racism, your own inherent privilege or misogyny or sexism, right? Because there's parts of it that are in you that you don't know about. And I think that what you're saying here, I think, is really helpful for a lot of people to keep that in mind as we move forward, of like not punching down to brown-skinned folks in the Middle East. Like it's not healthy at all. It's not right, especially when it comes to the human flourishing of all of our neighbors,
Yeah, and to that point, I would love to say that it's interesting that, for example, like we just said, they're punching down on Zorhan Mamdani and equivocating him to a terrorist just because of his background or his religion, and not calling out the slew of white American domestic terrorists that we have in this country who are committing mass shootings, who helped with January 6th. And in my mind, we should call all of it out equally. If there's Islamic fundamentalists that do something here, prosecute them. Of course, that's wrong and bad. If there are other people like that did January 6th, those are domestic terrorists, prosecute them. That is bad. These are all things that are bad. And to only see one of them as bad and the other one is okay, that just shows your own bias.
Completely. And also, look, I mean, statistically, it's not a fair take. In America, we have a white Christian fundamentalist problem. We don't have a radical Islamist problem, right? Maybe in different parts of the world we have that problem, but I'm an American man, and I'm also a Christian. And so for us, our obligation is calling that stuff out. My friend Qasim Rashid, a human rights lawyer, a great friend of the show, him and I will talk about the problems in other parts of the world, of his tradition and what they're trying to eradicate when it comes to fundamentalism. And we shake hands on that, right? Trying to find a better path forward for all of our neighbors. I want to ask. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
He ran for office in Virginia, didn't he?
I don't know if he did. I would not be surprised if he did. I never asked him that though. That's funny.
Yeah, I think he did.
He would do that. He's a great human, and we talk often. He's been on the show multiple times and vice versa. And, we often talk about how he's Muslim, I'm Christian, but we have shared values, right? And we can have different beliefs and have shared values and promote the well-being of all of our neighbors while respecting the beliefs that we have and really learn from each other. And it's been a really great friendship to get to know him over the past few years. It's been a lot of fun. I do want to ask you, as we kind of get ready to land the plane a little bit, and again, thank you so much for making time. How can folks in the Western world, myself, this audience, folks like us, right, who just have no clue, like we're trying to catch up on the world that's so much bigger than America, trying to educate ourselves as quickly as possible. How can we help? Like, what can we do to be a friend and ally to the Iranians who are fighting so desperately for their liberation? What can we do to help?
I think keeping it in conversation and in the conversations you have with your elected officials, with the media, with the public. I think not silencing Iranian voices as far as like, oh, it's not that bad over there, or trying to like kind of not condescend to, but kind of like, I call it Iran-splaining, where people who aren't Iranian try to tell Iranians like, well, no, this is what your country is like. And it's like, no, we live there. We know what it's like. It's actually really repressive. It's not, and I get this whole notion too of like, listen, America has been an imperialist force around the country and they have done a lot of bad things. That is true. But that doesn't mean that the Islamic Republic is good, because the Islamic Republic itself has been an imperialist force in the Middle East. And so both things can be bad and true at the same time. So I think listening to Iranian voices, amplifying them, amplifying the human rights issues that are happening right now. They're arresting scores of people. 3 have been executed. I believe actually now it's up to 6 since the start of this war, because they changed the definition of espionage to be much more broad. You could have texted somebody during the Iran-Israel war, oh, the such and such building got hit, but we're okay, or something like that, and they can take that as like, oh, So you were helping? You were talking to outside sources? Were you? Did you know about this bombing? Like, did you have anything to do with it? And this is what happens every time there is a problem, a conflict, negotiations with the West. They become much more repressive on their own people because they want to squash any chance of an uprising or protest. They've already rearrested dissident voices just to keep them away from the public. And so this is something that's happening right now that like people should be focused on. They're literally getting ready to execute people on trumped up charges of espionage, no due process, trials like this, where it's like, oh, did you say this in a text? Did you do that? Okay, so, and they want to do it to make it seem like they've got everything under the control. Oh, we found the spies. We have everybody. Everything's fine now. So that's something that, people should keep their eye on. And also, I think that everybody should be pushing for world powers to pressure this regime to have internationally monitored elections where the supreme leader steps aside and they let the people decide. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening without some sort of, I don't know, whether it's a threat of force or something, or another mass uprising potentially. But, an internationally monitored election is really the only way to get a free and fair election inside of Iran and hopefully change this theocracy into a secular democracy and have freedom, real freedom for the people of Iran that's coming from their own hands, from within, from their own people inside.
I love that. While you have the attention of this audience, is there anything I missed that you really want to highlight in this conversation?
I think we hit everything. I think just, to remember that the overwhelming majority, tens of millions of Iranians do not agree with their regime. I shouldn't even say their regime because they don't legitimize them as theirs, but they don't they don't feel this regime represents them or is representative of Iran. And I feel the same way. I think they try to take this country back to like caveman times. And I think sometimes even cavemen were kinder to people and women. And, I think to remember that, and that when we hear all this rhetoric in the media, Iran did this, Iranians feel this way. Remember, they're talking about the regime, actually. They need to differentiate. It's not the people. Iran is full of brilliant artists and talent and scientists and engineers that, we have some of the smartest people in the world that win like world math and science prizes and they're being like stifled in this country. And if they happen to get out, they actually benefit the countries that they immigrate to because now these countries have those bright minds instead of them being able to flourish in their own homeland. So I think the more that everybody can support the people of Iran and the policies that will enable them to get rid of this regime is what I would love everybody to do.
Well, speaking of talented Iranians, you are one of them. You have an amazing platform. You have a podcast. You're an actor. I saw some of your bits on YouTube. I saw the one the dating app that you did. That like the whole skit about that. It was hilarious. So I mean, go ahead and plug away. Where can folks find you if they want to hear more?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I am Nazanin Nour. I'm on Twitter under my name. My podcast and digital show is called Mehmooni with Nazanin, and that's MEHMOONI with Nazanin. And I do a lot of fun bits. I have actors on, comedians from different backgrounds too. I play, games teaching them about Persian language and culture. I do street segments where I go interview people. I've always tried to use my platform to bring people together, to bridge this gap between Iranians and Americans so they see, again, the people are not the regime. It's always been really important to me. And I just love spreading our culture to the rest of the world and talking to interesting, smart people and who are also funny. And I'm going to, keep that going. And who knows what the world will bring.
Who knows? Well, Nazanin, it was great having you. This platform is always open to you. Anytime you want to come back on the show, you have my email. You're more than welcome to come back on. It was great meeting you, and thanks for all of your work.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me on.
Likewise.